Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those of you that are here with us in person, as well as those of you on live stream. We're really pleased to be having this composting workshop today. This workshop is one in a series of workshops that we will be doing that are part of the Community for Climate project. And that project is funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada. And the Climate Action Team is the one that then makes sure that all of this happens. So that we're very thankful for the funding for this and for the Climate Action Team for helping us do some of this community, different climate actions within the community. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 2 traditional lands of the Ojibwe, the Oji-Cree, the Cree, the Anishinaabe, the Dene, the Dakota Sioux, as well as we are in the heart of the Métis Nation. These peoples have for thousands of years taken care of this land and given us teachings about how to take care for the earth and our relations. We hope to continue that in gratitude, and thanks for that. So today's workshop is Composting 101. The very first part from 10 until 11:30 is backyard composting. Hopefully a lot of you already do that, and you'll be just getting more tips and tricks about how to make that all work really well. That will at 11:30, then we'll break for lunch, and that is upstairs in the lounge area. And that is till noon, and then at noon, we will have the vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. After that's done, we're gonna have a panel, and in our panel, we have some local people who run businesses or are part of businesses that are either composting or doing zero waste or trying to promote more composting and vermicomposting, and they're gonna come up and talk about what they're doing within our community, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions if you have some questions. So just a few little housekeeping things before we get going here. There is coffee at the back, and you are allowed to drink coffee in the pews. That's more than acceptable. We have compostable cups, so the cups go into the recycling bin that's right next to it when you're done. And then what we do with those is we save them until the city is doing their composting program again, and then they go into the compost at the landfill. So that, because you need a really big hot compost to be able to make those actually disintegrate in the proper way. So there is coffee back there. If you need the restroom, you go through the back doors, through the other two doors, and you can either go up the stairs next to the kitchen, there's a non-gendered bathroom, or you can go down the stairs, and there are a male and a female bathroom down there. If you have difficulty with stairs, there is an elevator, so please talk to me or any one of our team, and we'll be happy to help you get that elevator so you don't have to hurt yourself going up or down stairs. Okay? So I think that's all I need to say. Oh, I almost forgot. I did get into the community project, but this particular workshop is put on by the Climate Action Team, partnered with Sustainable Brandon and the Knox Green Team. So we're all working together to try and get the word out that there are things that we can do, that we personally can do to fight climate change. So we're very happy to have you all here to help us promote that. And so now I am going to introduce Kristen Malik, who is from the Compost Program Coordinator at the Green Action Center. And the Green Action Center is one of those organizations that's part of the Climate Action Team. And we're gonna pass that over to her, and she's gonna tell us all about backyard composting. Thank you.
Madeline, can everyone hear? Oh, now I can hear. I have this very fancy headset. It's really nice to see everyone. Dordana and I drove in from Winnipeg this morning, had a nice little road trip. I'm really excited to talk to you about composting today. And how many here, I would love to get an idea of what everyone's experience level is with composting. So put up your hand if you've never composted before. Oh, okay, I love having some newbies, yes. Okay, put up your hand if you used to compost but have stopped for whatever reason. Okay, great, room for improvement. And put up your hand if you're currently composting. Whoa, okay, we've got a lot of converted here already. Awesome. Okay, great. I'll just give you a little background on my composting experience. I basically grew up composting. I've grown up in Winnipeg. My mom was an avid gardener, so composting has been a regular thing for me. But it wasn't really until I moved into my own house that I really paid attention to composting. And that's when I realized, oh, I actually have to do things to the compost pile so that I don't get wasps. I had some wasp nests in there, I had some mice. Things wouldn't really progress very quickly. So it was actually when I started working here that obviously I really got into it and realized that there's some really easy key things to do to your compost to be really successful. I'm here today to talk about just like how to make the process easy and simple, and I'll talk about the common things problems that people tend to run into. So for those of you who maybe stopped composting because you had some issues, hopefully we can cover those and get you back composting. And I'm going to have Betty, I'm going to tell her when to progress to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to start off the morning with a quote about composting from Bette Midler. I love that she has a quote about composting. Apparently she's crowned herself the queen of compost. My whole life has been spent waiting for an epiphany, the kind of transcendent, magical experience that lets you see your place in the big picture. And that is what I had with my first compost heap. I love that. I think it explains, it like signifies composting perfectly for me. It's such like a cool thing to just have all these vegetable and food scraps and you put into a pile, and then it just magically turns into this lovely compost that you can use to improve your garden and improve your soil. So I'm really excited to talk about composting today. Okay, Betty, you can go ahead. A really big, impactful stat that I like to share with people is that over 40% of the waste that we send to our landfills are comprised of organic waste, so compostable waste. So in 2020, this is a Winnipeg statistic, but it'd be very similar. Well, not as similar in Brandon because you have composting, but if you didn't, we send about 194,000 polar bears worth of organic waste to our landfill in the year 2020. That's a lot. That's a lot. So we want to, for several reasons, we want to divert that waste from our landfill. And I'll be getting into why we do not want to put organic waste in our landfills and why composting is such an important thing to do. Okay, Betty, sorry. All right, so I'm just gonna go have a brief intro of Green Action Center and what we do, if you've never heard of us before. Oh, can you go back to the next slide? Thanks, Betty. I'll talk about what composting is, why we want to do it, how you go about really how composting works. And then I'll go over the common problems that people tend to have when they're composting. And then throughout the next section, I'll talk about how to compost and how to deal with those issues that people tend to come across. And then we'll talk about how to harvest your compost. Okay, go ahead, Betty. And then you can click the slide again. Okay, so Green Action Center is an environmental nonprofit based in Winnipeg. And our main goal is to educate people on how to live greener lifestyles. And we do that through educational programs and through advocating for policy change. Okay, so you can click. And of course, we're promoting the slowing down of climate change. So we have two main project areas, waste reduction and sustainable transportation. Oh, you can click. It's harder when there's animations. Okay, so have any of you heard of Compost Winnipeg? That's fair, 'cause you're in Brandon. So unlike in Brandon, we do not have a citywide compost collection system. So we started a social enterprise back in 2016 called Compost Winnipeg, and they're an organic waste pickup service that clients pay a service fee to receive that service. And then on the waste reduction side of things, we have our composting program, which I work in. You can go ahead, Betty. And you can click again. Oh, there we go. First Nations waste minimization, so they work with First Nations communities on setting up recycling programs, organic waste programs, instead of just having a landfill. And Living Green, Living Well, we help folks realize, reduce their plastic waste and focus on reusable items. And then on sustainable transportation side of things, again, we try to encourage and work with workplaces and schools on getting to work and school other than in a car. We have the Jack Frost Challenge, which is coming up, starting tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up, it's a great way to get outside and be active. And then we also have our Workplace Commuter Challenge that you may have heard of as well. Okay, go ahead. Oh, and our newest thing is sustainability projects. They are working with on this project as well, and so they do green audits for organizations and for businesses to help them look at their organization as a whole, how they can become more sustainable, which is really neat, and it's a newer thing that we're doing. Okay, you can go to the next one, Betty. We're done with all those animations. Okay, so what is composting? So composting is super simple. It's nature's way of recycling. It's when you have organic materials. So that organic materials, it's not the organic produce that you get in the grocery store. It's anything that used to be living. So animal, plant, that'd be your fruit scraps, veggie scraps, meat, bones, Kleenex, wood. That you put that into a pile. It breaks down and decomposes, and it turns into compost. So compost sometimes is confused with soil. It's not a soil, it's a soil amendment. It's something you add to your soil to increase the quality of your soil and help to increase the available nutrients in the soil for the plants. Okay, you can go ahead, Betty. Next slide. So this decomposition process is carried out by a wide variety of organisms. We've got your microorganisms, which are bacteria and fungi. The bacteria is the star of the show. And that's the organisms that get things really hot and really get things going. And then you have your larger microorganisms, which include all these lovely little bugs like millipedes, sow beetles, worms, snails. And I like to call them your pets. They're like your compost critters. And just like your pets, you need to feed them. So all those food scraps you're adding to your pile are their food. And just like us, they need three things to survive. They need food, oxygen, and water. So if they're getting all those three things, then they're gonna be super happy, and you're gonna have lovely compost in no time. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're back at the polar bear slide. So as I mentioned earlier, a large portion of our waste is compostable or organic. So why does it matter if we put organic waste in the landfill? Well, actually, when we put it in our landfill, it creates methane, and methane is a greenhouse gas 25 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So what happens is, I mentioned that those compost critters, they need oxygen to survive. So in a landfill, and Betty, you can go to the next slide. In a landfill, there's actually no oxygen present. Like, everything's compacted in the landfill. So instead, you have anaerobic bacteria, and then when they eat all that organic material, they actually exhale methane. Another reason also that we don't want to have organic materials in our landfills is because it creates really harmful leachate. So all landfills have leachate collection systems, actually. And in Winnipeg, the leachate has to be trucked from the landfill to the water treatment system. I think it's about 6 truckfuls that go every day. So it costs a lot of money, and it also creates a lot of greenhouse gases as well. It also takes up a lot of space. As I mentioned, almost half of our waste is made up of organic materials. So by diverting that material from the landfill, it really extends the lifespan of our landfills. An interesting stat, the Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg is the second highest point source polluter of greenhouse gases in Manitoba. And there's a fertilizer plant right here in the Brandon area that is the highest point source polluter of greenhouse gases. So that's another thing too. The creation of synthetically produced fertilizer also creates a lot of greenhouse gases. So if we can divert our waste from the landfill and use that to create fertilizer, then we reduce our need for synthetically produced fertilizers as well. So it's win-win both ways. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's some other reasons why we want to compost. It's actually really cool. They've done studies at Brandon University where vegetables grown with compost amended soil, they're actually, like they grow, they're bigger, but they're actually higher in nutrients too, which is really neat. It also helps you save money. Like you, again, don't have to buy fertilizer. You actually don't have to water as much because it helps, compost helps your soil retain moisture. And I'm not sure what your soils are like here. Maybe probably different than in Winnipeg, but in Winnipeg we have really dense clay soils. And so adding compost helps to improve the texture of the soils. It helps them not to be so dense and helps to aerate the soil, which is really cool. And as I mentioned, it's like vitamins for your plants. Like they're just gonna grow a lot better, and it helps to reduce diseases as well too. Okay, next slide. So there are some common issues that people tend to run into when composting. I definitely have run into them, as I mentioned. We got slow decomposition. You put your stuff in the compost bin, and then you're excited for things to happen, and then nothing happens. You're like, what's going on? Rodents are a big fear that some people have, and that's why a lot of people don't want to compost. So we're going to talk about how to make it so that they don't want to go into your bin. And sometimes things may get really stinky as well. And then fruit flies, that's a common problem that people tend to have. As I mentioned, wasps are, again, something unwanted in your bin. So as I talk about how to get started and how to go about composting, I'll address those issues and how to prevent them. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what's great about composting is it's really quite simple. So there's kind of some key steps that you need to do, and then I'll go through them in detail. So you have to layer your pile with greens and browns. You put your food in the bin. You have to turn your pile. You make sure there's enough moisture in your pile. And then you block odors with browns, but again, we'll talk about that. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so first off, if you haven't started composting yet, you want to figure out where to place your compost bin. Accessibility is a big thing. You want it to be easy. We're all creatures that we like things easy. So if it's really out of the way and annoying to get to, then you're not going to want to do it. So I compost in the winter. You can totally compost in the winter. So something I think of is how far of a path do I have to trudge through in the snow to get to the compost bin. But some people don't like to have it right next to their house. You also want to think, are your neighbors cool with composting? If not, maybe don't have it right next to their yard. It's ideal to have the compost bins on grass or dirt because the bottom is open and you're going to have some moisture leaching out. But you also want those microorganisms in the soil underneath to come up into your compost bin. But if you need to put it on concrete, just make sure you put like a shovelful of soil into the bin so you can introduce those microorganisms. Some people think you have to put your compost bin in full sun to get it nice and hot, but it's actually the bacteria that's getting things hot. And also if it's in a full sun area, then it'll dry out a lot quicker, so you have to add water more. So really, it doesn't matter if it's in the shade or the sun. Whatever works for you, I say just put it there. Okay, next slide. So there's a wide variety of bins that you can choose from, and you can just use a pile. You don't even have to have an actual bin, especially if you're more in a rural area. You can even use like chicken wire to make your own bin, and it can be very cost-effective and cheap. I have the molded black plastic bin at home. I have 2 of them. There's 2 adults and 2 young kids, and I find that works really well. The black plastic bins, they're convenient because they're really easy to move around. They're super light, and so if you don't like it in the spot that they're in, you can move it around. Also, well, if I'm harvesting, I'll just like lift the whole thing up, and then I can harvest the whole pile, which is nice. I find that it tends to dry out a lot quicker than a wooden bin because it's black and it gets really hot. And it can be a little annoying to turn the compost pile, just like how the bin is made. And they tend to run for about like $80 to $100. And then there's also tumbler bins as well, which some people really like. So it basically is on a stand, and then you have a crank, and you just turn it. So you don't actually have to get in there with with your pitchfork or a compost turner to actually turn the pile. Those are a lot more expensive, and apparently they're supposed to decompose. The items are supposed to decompose a lot quicker, but I find that they fill up pretty quickly too. So if you have a lot of people in your household, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's good for smaller spaces too. And same with the black plastic bins, they tend to be better for smaller spaces because they take up less space. I really prefer the wooden bins. One, because you can make your own. You can make them from reused pallets, which is really cool. It's super simple to make. On our website, we actually have a lot of different building plans for compost bins, so you can check that out. I prefer the 2 or 3 bin system, actually, especially if you have, for our situation, I find it's nice to fill up one bin, and then you just let it sit and decompose, and then you start filling up the next empty bin, because then you have this one nice full bin of that will be eventually finished compost. And then if you the third bin, you can even use it to store leaves, because you always want to have those browns. Again, there's different ways you can go about making them. You want to make sure that they're no bigger than, preferably 3 feet by 3 feet, or not bigger, no smaller than 3 feet by 3 feet. Because if you have something that's really small, then you don't have enough material in there to really get going, to really get composting. And make sure you have, like, the best ones are if you have like a removable panel in the front or a door, so that's really easy to harvest. Because if you have to like reach in and shovel everything out, it's really annoying. And then some people will have lids on their compost bins as well, because it's a great way to keep any animals out, especially if you have a dog or if you have raccoons in your area. It's a way to keep all those little animals out, or big animals. And always make sure there's air holes too. That's another thing. So if you're making a wooden bin, make sure there's some cracks between the boards, and the molded bins that you buy would always have air holes as well, because again, those compost critters, they need that oxygen. Okay, next slide. Okay, so you need a bin, preferably, again, you can just have a pile. And then you only need a couple other tools, really, to get started. So you need a container of some sort in your house to collect your food scraps. So you can use something as easy as an ice cream container. I have that metal pail on the right side of the screen. I bought it from Lee Valley Tools. It's like $30 to $40. It's really nice because it's metal, so it doesn't absorb all of like the yucky smells. But you can also get the plastic ones like that from places for around like $15 to $20 as well. But I find they don't last as long as the metal ones. And then you just need a tool to turn your compost pile. So as pictured here on the left is a compost aerator, and we actually have some at the front. I find it really nice, especially with the plastic bin, because you put it in, and it has little wings. And when you pull it up, the wings come out and like they pull up material to the top, and they have make that nice aerating tunnel. Like my daughter, when she was 2, would be able to do it on her own, so it's really nice. But you can also use a garden fork or a pitchfork as well. That totally works too. Okay, next slide. All right, so then once you have everything all set up, the next step is to start adding materials to your compost bin. So just like us, we have our food groups that we need to eat. Same with the compost critters. They have their 2 food groups. They have greens and browns. So greens are items that are fresh and recently alive. So that'd be like your fruit and veggie scraps, fresh grass clippings, fresh plants, like plants that you just recently pulled. And so those are high in nitrogen, and browns are high in carbon. And those are items that tend to be dried. So you got your dried leaves, your straw, sawdust, wood chips, Kleenex, use Kleenex or paper towels. And there's some interesting things that you can put in your compost pile that you may not think you can. So you can totally put your hair in there. Dryer lint, but I wouldn't put, so I usually don't put my dryer lint in my compost pile because I have a lot of mixed fibers. So I'll have, clothes made out of polyester. So that I wouldn't want to put into my compost pile because it's plastic. But if you do, like, say, a load of all cotton or linen, you can totally put that into your compost bin. And yeah, I put rice, pasta, bread. I even put, if my 5-year-old doesn't finish her peanut butter sandwich or something, I'll put the rest in there. It's okay if there's some peanut butter on there. And you can put wood ash, so not coal ash, but wood ash in there. Not a lot, but you can actually put that in there. And it's actually really good to sprinkle in your garden too. It helps to get rid of flea beetles, which is really neat. Okay, next slide. Oh, you can skip past this one. And items that you do not want to put in your bin would be any type of meat product. So backyard compost bins don't tend to get hot enough. So that's when things can get pretty stinky. So I actually experimented and put like a piece of meat like maybe this big in my compost bin. I put it in the middle, and I found things got pretty smelly. I know some people are able to do that, but it's because they maintain their compost pile pretty well and it gets nice and hot. So if you're starting out, I would recommend not doing that. But also that's what's fun about composting. It's totally an experiment. You can try things out and see how things work. So you can put eggshells, but not whole eggs. And avoid dairy products and oils, because again, things can get pretty stinky. You definitely do not want to put cat and dog waste in there. Again, there's pathogens in their waste that would not be killed off by the composting process. But if you have any herbivorous pet, like a gerbil or a rabbit, you can totally put their waste in there. And if you put, you can just dump the shavings and the dirty shavings into the compost pile, and then you've got your browns, the wood shavings, and the greens, their waste. So it's perfect, actually. And just like us, those compost critters don't eat plastic or metal or synthetic products. So don't put those in there. Speaking of that, compostable plastics. It's confusing. Unfortunately, these are not designed for backyard composting systems because it has to get to a certain temperature in order for these materials to break down. So if you put, even this looks like it's paper, but there's a compostable plastic lining. So I've experimented and I've ripped it up into small pieces, and it's still taking forever to decompose in my bin. So you do have the option here when your compost program is running. I think it takes compostable plastic? Yeah, okay. So lucky for you, you do have that option. Most people do have that option. So don't put these in your backyard bin. And always make sure, again, terminology is super confusing as well. Avoid things that say biodegradable or degradable. That usually doesn't mean it's compostable. So make sure it says compostable. And, excuse me, the BPI certified, I don't know if you can see, but BPI certified compostable products are tested and for sure are compostable. So just be aware of greenwashing. Like that's a big thing in the compostable plastics industry is not really well regulated right now because it's very new. So it's just something to really watch for. Just don't take the word of manufacturers at you don't believe everything they say. So make sure it says compostable and BPI certified is really great. Okay, go on to the next one. Oh, and I forgot to mention, for something not to add, which I've done this, is do not put diseased plants in your compost pile, like things with fungus, because again, your compost pile probably won't get hot enough to kill it off. Especially, I don't put any of my tomato plants in there because they tend to get blight sometimes. And then if it goes into your compost, it stays in there, and then you spread it on your garden, and then it just stays in your garden, and you just always have that continuous fungal problem. So avoid that. And I also don't put like weed seeds in there. Like I don't put dandelion seeds in there or other seeds because I'm just worried it's not going to get hot enough in my compost pile. But it is possible. You can do it. Yes? I honestly, like if it has mildew when it's alive, I would put it in my yard waste compost, and so the city can just take that and compost it, because anything with like a fungus. So like I know my cucumber plants will get that powdery mildew, or sometimes my squash, the leaves will get the mildew. I don't put that in my compost pile. Yeah, just again because I don't want it to go into the compost and spread it. So yeah, and we have yard waste pickup, and you have your compost pickup during the gardening season. So I would say just send it that way. Then they have the nice hot temperatures to get rid of that. And another thing that people think that you cannot compost are rhubarb leaves, because it's poisonous for us to eat rhubarb leaves. But it's the oxalic acid that it makes us sick, but you can actually compost that because it breaks down, and so it's totally fine to put that in your compost bin. Okay. All right, so I mentioned there's 2 types of food groups that they need, greens and browns. So you want to make sure you have the correct ratio. So you basically have 2 to 3 times much of browns as you do greens. So every time I add a pail full of food scraps to my compost bin, I add about 2 pails full of leaves. So if you have too many greens, they have a lot of moisture, and that's when things can get compacted and too wet, and that's when you lose the oxygen, and that's when things get really smelly. So that's when you can get a smelly compost bin. As well, if you don't add browns over top of your greens, that's when you're going to get all those fruit flies just flying at your face when you open the lid of your compost bin. Because fruit flies, that's where they live on. They lay their eggs on the rinds of fruits. So they're super happy. If there's exposed fruit in your compost pile, then they're going to go for it. So always make sure that you put a nice layer of browns over your greens. And if you find you take the lid off and there's still some, then just put some more browns on top, and then it totally solves the problem. Another issue is if you have too many browns. So you have too many browns, that means things are going to get too dry, and you're not going to get that bacterial activity, and that's when everything slows down, and that's when you're not going to have any finished compost. You're going to wait for a year or 2 years, and nothing's going to happen. So if you find that it's too dry, then you can always add some water and mix it in, and just make sure you put less browns in the next time you add some greens. Something about the browns does as well is they help to aerate the pile because they have that dryness to them and that shape. So it actually helps to maintain air pockets in your pile. And it also helps to reduce odors. So if you don't have those odors, if you're covering the greens, then you're not going to have all of those animals coming to the pile to check things out. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, again, you just want to layer your pile. So every time you add the greens, you add browns. Okay, go the next one. And yeah, so if you need to add those browns every time you add your greens, then you need to have a place to store your leaves, and you're going to want to have them nice and close to your compost pile. So what we do is we have our compost bins, and then, actually, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Don't judge my fence and all my weeds. Yeah. We actually have a new fence now, but the wind blew it over. So yeah, we have the 2 Rubbermaid bins next to the compost bins, and that's where we store our leaves, our dried leaves. So what we do is when we rake our leaves, we just put them in those garbage bins, have a lid on it so that they're sealed and they don't get wet, and then I can just reach into the bin of leaves and put the leaves into the compost bin when I add my greens, my food scraps. Super easy. And the mice can't get in there either as well. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, you want to make sure you have the right amount of oxygen and water in your compost pile. So ideally, your compost pile should feel like a damp, wrung-out sponge. So sometimes you may want to check things out, and you don't want to use the top as the top of your pile as an indicator if it's wet enough. You have to really get in there and stick your hand in there. If it's too wet, then that's when you're going to want to add some browns and then make sure you mix it in. And if it's too dry, again, sometimes if it's really hot or if there's lots of sun, I find you have to add water. Like I find I have to add water at least once a month to mine. And when you do that, when you add the water, make sure you really mix it in nicely. And again, you need to have enough oxygen. So in order to do that, you need to turn your pile. So we recommend turning your pile no more than once a week. If you do it more than that, then you're going to disturb the bacteria, and then they're not going to be able to have their time to just do their thing. But no less than once every 3 weeks. So like once a month-ish. I find because I get lazy or I forget, so I find if I don't turn it enough, then that's when things kind of slow down. So if you make sure there's enough water, and if you turn 1 to 3 times a week, then you're good to go. And that's when things get nice and hot, and that's when you don't find mice. So I find mice will come into my bin if it gets too dry. And also just the act of regularly turning your compost pile will also disturb the mice, and it'll stop them from nesting in your compost pile, and because they don't want to be there if it's being disturbed, and if it's too wet and too hot, then it's not a place they want to be. And that's what happened when I had wasps as well. Like, I just completely neglected it, and it was nice and dry, and it was a perfect spot for them to nest because I wasn't turning it or adding water. So if you're paying attention to the right amount of water, oxygen, and greens and browns, then you should be good to go. Okay, next slide. Okay, so who here composts in the winter? Okay, so a lot of you do. Yeah, that's great. So some people think that you can't compost in the winter. Obviously, things are going to freeze up and not decompose in the winter because it gets so cold here. But you can still add all of your food scraps to your compost pile. And so this is a picture of our compost pile on the rooftop garden of our old office in downtown Winnipeg. And this is what mine tends to look like too. If the bin is really full, it kind of just, it freezes, you add more, it freezes, and can get pretty big. So for that reason, I don't add leaves or browns when I add my food scraps to the pile, to the bin, because it just takes up a lot of room, and sometimes you don't have that room. And so what happens when the spring comes and it starts thawing out, that freeze-thaw cycle actually really breaks down the food scraps really quickly. And it'll go from that to like half the amount. It's really cool. It'll like just shrink down really quickly. And once that happens, then that's when I add my leaves. And then I just mix it in, and then you're good to go. Sometimes it can be annoying to go outside to your compost bin in the winter. I find it annoying sometimes. So what some people will do is they actually will stockpile their food scraps in something like a 5-gallon pail or a garbage bin outside their door. And it just and what they'll do is make compost burritos as well. So you wrap it in newspaper. So you maybe line your collection pail inside with newspaper, you add your food scraps, and then you just wrap it up like a little burrito, and then you put it into the pail outside. And then once it's full, then you can go empty it into your compost bin. And then it's not like sticking to the sides of the pail because you have it nicely wrapped in the newspaper. And then you've got your browns that are added as well because it's paper. So that's really cool. Okay, yeah. No, so now most inks are like soy-based, so you can totally put colored ink. I just avoid like glossy flyers or like magazine paper, things that are glossier, but I'll put colored paper in there. Just make sure you shred it, because if it's not shredded, it'll decompose, but it just takes a lot longer to do that. Yeah. Ooh, mm-hmm. Nice. Oh yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah, oh, it definitely will decompose a lot faster when it's broken down. Yeah, if it's sitting on top, it doesn't, on top of the soil, it won't decompose as quicker. You can always turn it into the soil as well, which will make it a lot quicker. Yeah, and I would do that too if our bin was getting too full. we were just throwing it in the vegetable garden eventually, and then I would just mix it into the soil when spring came. And that's something that people do as well. It's called trench composting, or you can just dig a hole into your garden or a trench, and you can put your food scraps in there. I've actually put chicken bones in there eventually, when I've dug them up about a year later, they're all really soft, which is really cool. But it kind of looks like a little graveyard in my vegetable garden, so I have all these chicken bones everywhere. So yeah, if you can cut up your food scraps, that actually helps them decompose a lot quicker. So I don't have the time, or I just don't have the inclination to do that, but if you can and want to, that's great. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions about what you can add to the compost bin? I forgot to mention, and this is something that people ask a lot, we put our used Kleenexes in our compost pile. It actually surprisingly takes quite a long time for them to decompose because they're balled up, and the material is quite thick actually. So you can also put used paper towels in there too as well. If we're really sick, if we had COVID or something, I wouldn't put it in there, but if you just have allergies or whatever, you can totally put it in your compost bin. Yeah. totally fine. And again, like if they've gone to seed, you may not want to put it in there, but it depends. If you don't mind that flower, or you're fine with it coming up in your garden, then go for it. Yeah. But I have like I don't know if you've heard of bellflower. It's those, I call it like the devil's flower. It's so bad. And even little pieces, you don't even need the seeds. You need just like little tiny pieces of the root, so for it to come up. So I definitely do not put it in the compost bin at all. Like that goes to the city to take care of it. So yeah, flowers are totally fine to put in there though. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? All right, so we've talked about how to compost, what to add, how to maintain your compost bin, but how do you know when it's finished? Like how do you know when your compost is ready to be harvested? For me, it takes about like a full year. So say if we start with a empty compost bin in the spring, it fills up over the season, through the winter, and then come spring, it's usually ready to be harvested and to use. It usually is the fall time when I actually tend to harvest everything. And we usually say fall is the best time to harvest, because if it's not fully finished, it may look like it's fully finished and ready to go, but it actually may not be fully cured. If you let it, sit in a pile in your garden, it can actually cure more throughout the winter. But there's 3 things that you need to look for to decide if it's ready or not. So you want to make sure there's no visible food remnants. So if you still see some banana peels or apple cores, it's not ready. Like avocado pits, like really woody things, avocado pits, other pits, sticks. If that's all you see, then that's totally fine, because those just take longer to decompose. Make sure it doesn't stink like garbage. If it has still like a stinky smell, then it's not ready. But if you smell it and it smells like soil, you're good to go. And make sure there's no heat. So again, to figure that out, you can stick your hand into the pile, or you can turn it. And if it's still hot, you'll feel that heat coming off of the pile. And if there's still stuff to decompose, that means the bacteria is still there, and they're creating that heat. So if that's happening, then just leave it be. But if there's no heat, it doesn't smell, and you can't see any food, then it's ready to go. Okay, next slide. So there's a variety of different ways to harvest depending on the type of compost bin you have. So as I mentioned before, with my black bin like that, it's super simple. I just pick it up, and then I have that pile of compost like that, and then I just shovel it into a wheelbarrow, and huzzah, there we go. If you have just one compost bin, then you may have newer stuff on the top that's not fully finished. So what you could do is, again, you can still like pick up that compost bin and then just maybe shovel the stuff that's not fully finished into a wheelbarrow, or put it back into the compost pot bin, and then take away the stuff that's finished, and then you're good to go. You notice there is like a little door at the front of that black compost bin. It's supposed to be the place, like the little door to harvest the compost from. It's useless. It's tiny. There's no point in it. So I don't even recommend using that. And if you have a wooden compost bin, as I mentioned, hopefully it has panels at the front that you can remove, or a door that you can open. And again, I recommend having 2 compost bins so that you can fully fill up that one compost bin and let it decompose and turn into compost. And you still want to make sure you're watering, you're monitoring moisture, and you're turning the compost, even though the bin is full. Because yeah, once that's finished, then you can just harvest everything out all at once, and it's super easy. Okay, next slide. And as I mentioned, a lot of the times you're going to have eggshells, sticks, avocado peels, avocado pits that are left over. So you can use a screen, which is really handy. So something like this. This is handmade, so you just get some wood, make a frame, and then just add some chicken wire or some hardware cloth, whatever it's called. And then you just put the finished compost through the sifter or the screen, and then it helps easily takes out all that woody material that then you can just put back in the compost bin to keep on decomposing. Okay, next slide. And there's a wide variety of different ways you can use your compost. I like to just spread mine on top of my garden, and then I like to mix it in so that it doesn't dry out. I find it tends to dry out if you use it as mulch, become kind of like chunky and hard sometimes. It depends. So I like to mix it in. Or what you can also do if you're planting some seeds, if you make a seeding trench, you can put it at the bottom, or if you're making a new hole for a new plant, you can put it at the bottom of that hole. You can make your own potting mix as well, which is really fun. I think, what's the ratio? No more than a quarter. The compost should make no more of a quarter of the volume of the potting mix. And who here has heard of compost tea? Have any of you used it and tried it? Okay, yeah, and how did you, sorry if you don't want to talk, but how did you make it? Did you put it in a bucket? Did you aerate it, or just let it sit in the bucket? Did you stir it at all, or you aerated it? Did you use like an aquarium pump or something? Okay, nice. Yeah, so there's a variety of different ways you can do it. So you can aerate it, which is really ideal because then all those compost organisms, like the bacteria, they need oxygen to survive, so they're still alive in that compost tea. There we go. Yes, thank you. So I'll back up. So for those of you who aren't aware, compost tea is it's like making tea, but you make it with compost. So you get like an old sock or pantyhose, you get a handful of finished compost, and then you just put it in a bucket full of water, and you let it sit until it looks brown and it smells like compost. And then some people will aerate it, so you get all that oxygen to keep those beneficial organisms alive. Or some people will just stir it here and there. And then once it's finished, you can use it to water your plants to add those beneficial organisms. Some people will spray it on their plants because it's actually a really good fungicide. There's certain landscaping companies that will use it as a fertilizer and a fungicide, and they'll spray it on people's lawns or on their gardens, which is really cool. So yeah, there's different ways you can go about it. There's lots of different ways to, on the internet, there's different resources to check out how to do it. It's pretty cool. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick video. This is one of our Master Composter volunteers. So we have a Master Composter volunteer program. Up until 2019, we had an annual training program where we train people who are passionate about composting to learn how to teach others about composting, and so they can do presentations like this and such. So she's super cute, Linda.
You can have vegetables, lots of them, on your table next winter. You can have your own fresh vegetables on your table this summer if you have your own Victory Garden.
Well, I just like dirt. I just like dirt. It's the basis of everything. If you don't have dirt, you don't have anything. Yeah, I would like to say I'm an evangelist. Well, I'm not going to do the hallelujah and amen and all that stuff because, this is compost. My name is Linda Olson, and I am a master composter. Very basically, it is microorganisms chewing this stuff up, using water, using air, and breaking it down and turning it into dirt. When you are composting, you're not looking after your compost bin, you're thinking of looking after these microbes and what do they need to do their job. Some people think that compost is dirt. Just dirt and smelly, just rotting food that attracts vermin. But for healthy, odor-free, vermin-free compost, all you need is a bin, browns, greens, water, and air. Start with your layer of browns, then add a layer of greens. Always be sure you add 2 to 3 times as much browns as greens. Add water, stir occasionally, cover and simmer for 8 to 9 months. Now, most people are starting their compost in the spring, and they don't have leaves, they don't have browns. And what I tell them is use shredded up paper. So if you need dries and you don't have enough, maybe you have no trees, just take it from the neighbors. They're raking, they're putting it in bags, they're getting it ready for you. Just think of it, they're getting it ready for your compost. Even in the winter, I would keep layering, even though it freezes and you've got a big mound like this on top of your compost bin. The first hot day when the sun hits that, it sinks right down and you've got a head start. Gardeners will really understand this when they start seeing that this bulk is making their soil lighter and fluffier. They'll see the advantage of it.
If you have your own victory garden.
Compost-a-luia, brothers and sisters! Bring your eggshells, your apple cores, your rotten bananas, your paper bags. Come in and heal the earth.
She's so cute. Yeah, so that was a good summary about what we talked about this morning. Amen. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. Like, I don't have it on near a tree, so that's not an issue, but I have, like, if I get down to the pile, I'll get some grass coming in or the dreaded bellflower. So I have to, like, pick that out. Like, do you have that issue? Oh, wow. Yeah. Has it helped? Okay, that's good. You don't get stuck in it. Yeah, for sure. Mhm. It's very tough. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Totally. It's pretty neat how it's so cool how it just shrinks down like that. And you think it gets full and you think, oh, I have to start the new compost bin. But then in a couple days, it shrinks down again. You're like, oh, okay, never mind. I can still use this one. Oh, yes, good point. Thank you. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%. So for those who are watching virtually, audience member said, yeah, he stresses that you do not want your compost to dry out because that's usually the issue that people tend to have. And that's my issue. I'm always surprised by how quickly it dries out. And so I have to add it quite frequently, especially last summer. Which summer? No, it wasn't last summer. It was the summer before where it was really hot and really dry. And then he was asking about the if we have issues. He had issues with his trees, and so he put landscape cloth. What about like chicken wire over top of the landscape cloth? Oh, that's right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. And that's an issue, that's something that you want to think about too if you have the space, to not put it your compost bin right next to a tree, because the tree is like, ooh, look at all this lovely nutrients that I'm gonna go grow towards. So that is something that's a good point. That is something to think about. If you can, maybe not put it right next to a tree or close to a tree. Oh, sorry, she had a question in the back and then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's totally fine. So you can put rhubarb leaves in the compost pile because the oxalic acid is broken down in the composting process, and so it's totally fine. Yeah, I put them in there all the time. Or I also use them as a mulch for my garden. Like if I harvest my rhubarb, I'll just take the leaves off the stalk and then just actually leave it on the ground, on the soil in my garden, because it's really great mulch as well. I'm going to go to you next, and then I'll come back. Yes? Yeah, so she's wondering if she should remove the snow from, they're wondering if they should remove the snow from their compost when you add more greens. I personally don't. Like, how much snow do you, like, how much snow is over top the greens? For space sake, you may want to, just because then you're not trying to pile some food scraps on top of like a really big mound of snow. So if you are able to and you want to, then I would say do that, because it may make it easier for you if you remove the snow. But it's fine having that moisture. Like, the moisture is fine. It's just for practicality's sake, you may want to remove the snow. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, yes, you can use compost on lawns. So you definitely want to screen the compost, because something you can do is you can put it in those grass seed spreaders. Have you seen those? You use them to spread grass seed. You can put the compost in one of those, and then you can just like use it to spread it on your lawn. And it's a really great fertilizer for your lawn. Something else that is really great for your lawn and is a really easy fertilizer is not bagging your grass clippings. It's called grass cycling. And so you don't bag your grass clippings, you just let them sit on your lawn, and then it will quickly decompose. And it's a great fertilizer because grass is really high in nitrogen. But I will say, don't let your grass get super long, because if you do that, then you have mats of grass clippings on your yard, and that happens to us all the time too. So eventually you have to like rake it up, because you're just covered in grass and mats of grass. Anyone have any other questions? Okay. If you're interested in getting involved more with Green Action Center, we have our e-newsletter sign up at the front in the hallway. You can follow us on social media, our website to see what events we're having. We don't really have many volunteer opportunities, but we do sometimes. So, and again, you can always get involved with Jack Frost Challenge, which starts tomorrow. And again, if you want information, check it out on our website. Yes, you have a question? Yes. No, that's totally fine. So they're wondering if you could add coffee grounds along with the coffee filter once a day, and that's totally fine. And that coffee filter is a brown that you're adding, so it's a nice balance. So no, that's fine. Yeah. If you feel so inclined. It's pretty thin already, so it should be okay. It's not as thick as, say, like office paper or Kleenex, but yeah, if you want to. The smaller anything is, the faster it will decompose. Okay, so if you want to go to the next slide, Betty, we do have our composting info line. You can call or email the email address up there, compost@greenactioncenter.ca. I'm on the other side of that. So if you have any questions about composting, just shoot me a message my way, and I can always try to help you out. And we do have our composting booklets at that table over there, but it's also available online if you don't want a paper booklet that you're eventually going to get rid of because it's annoying. So yeah, it's definitely online. Yes. Yes. Those are our colors. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming. I have a question. Who's staying here for the vermicomposting presentation? Okay, great. Well, I'm excited to talk about worms with all of you. It's me. So I'll see you at noon for vermicomposting. And thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Kristen.
Well,
that was
thank you.
fabulous. So lunch is not for another 20 minutes or so. I don't want to rush Sharon. She's up there by herself trying to get everything ready for us. So I would recommend that you take the next 10 or 15 minutes slowly moseying your way up. You'll go through the back doors here and then through the next set and up the stairs. And then the first room on the left is the lounge, and that's where we'll be eating lunch. Please, talk to each other. Talk to each other about your composting issues, and we have a whole tribe of Katimavik folk here, young folk who have lots of interesting and exciting things they've been doing. So let's talk to each other and find out what's going on in our lives. If you would like to, you could go up and ask, for sure. Thank you. Okay. Oh. Excellent. A comment from online. Excellent. Great. So, yes, you online, you're on lunch break. If you're coming back for the vermicomposting, we'll do that at noon. Okay, so see you back at noon. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you had a good lunch and you met some new people, new friends. That was great. So Kristen is now going to lead us through a little bit about vermicomposting. And she's a little bit nervous because we do have an expert in the field here. But he's a nice guy, so I'm sure it'll be fine.
You shoot everything I say down.
No judgment. So the reality is that vermicomposting uses composting, which is very similar to what we talked about this morning. But she's going to go through it one more time because, you know, it takes 7 times before it starts to sink in. So you may have missed something the first time, so you're going to catch it on the flyby. So thank you, Kristen, and the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks. Did everyone enjoy your lunch? Yeah, me too. It was really good. Well, today we're going to talk about vermicomposting, and it's a really great option for people who don't have an outdoor space to compost. It's a really cheap pet to have, easy to take care of. That's what we have. We don't have dogs or cats. We have worms in our house. And it's great for schools as well. A lot of elementary schools will have a worm bin in their classroom because it's a really easy way to see and feel how decomposition works and how composting works. It's really hands-on, so there's lots of different reasons why this is a really great and accessible option too. It's great for those with physical disabilities as well, or limited physical abilities, because with a backyard compost bin, you have to get out there and turn it. It's a little more physical. This is, you just need a bin and you're good to go. So with that, my background on vermicomposting, it didn't actually, my journey with vermicomposting didn't actually start until I started working here in Green Action Center in 2019. This is our office vermicomposting bin. It's at least 3 years old because it's been around since I started, so I'm assuming it's a lot older than that, and I haven't killed them off yet, so yahoo! Yeah, and it's been a really fun process of learning, and as I mentioned, composting in general is all about experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And I find vermicomposting is quite simple and quite very easy, actually. I find easier than backyard composting, which is also quite easy. So again, I would love to see who has experience with vermicomposting, who never has tried it before. Okay, so put up your hand if you're currently vermicomposting. Okay. You've dabbled in it. Okay, all right. I did kill off some in my other bin, so it does happen. Okay, so who here used to vermicompost but stopped? Okay, yeah, that happens. And I'm assuming everyone else has never vermicomposted before. Okay, cool. Betty, you can go ahead with the slide. I'm going to skip over the Bette Midler quote. It's a very good one, but you've all heard it. And we can go past that one as well. So again, I'll quickly go over what composting is and why it's important in case there's people online who haven't heard that. I'll maybe summarize it a little more. And then I will talk about how to go about vermicomposting. And I'll go over common problems that people tend to run into as well, like troubleshooting, how to deal with it, and when and how to harvest your vermicompost. And I actually have some questions for you about that too. So it's a learning experience for all of us. Okay, so you can go ahead to the next slide. And we're going to skip the Green Action Center one as well. Basically, we're, again, for those of you online who haven't heard this yet, we're an environmental nonprofit based in Winnipeg, and we focus on helping folks live greener lifestyles and also, in general, trying to reduce climate change. So we do this with waste reduction programs and sustainable transportation programs. So we do this education in schools and workplaces and organizations, and through events as well. So we'll go to farmers markets, to different conferences, and also with policy advocacy. So we tend to build relationships with city councilors, try to get them to make greener policies. Like right now, with the city of Winnipeg, city councilors will be voting some point this year on whether or not they will implement a citywide compost collection system. So right now we don't have that in Winnipeg, so they're going to vote yes or no on that. So we're going to create a letter writing campaign for people to indicate their support for that. So things like that, that's what we do. Okay, go on to the next slide. Oh, 100%, yes. Like Brandon, Winkler, Morden, there's some other communities in Manitoba that already have municipal composting, so Winnipeg has to get on it. Just to recap, composting is a natural process in which a wide variety of organisms decompose our organic materials. So we can put these organic materials into just a pile in your yard or in the bush or in a compost pile or a vermicomposting bin. It decomposes and it turns into compost, which is a soil amendment, not a soil. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And you can go to the next slide, Betty. Thank you. As I mentioned, that decomposition process is carried out by a wide variety of microorganisms and macroorganisms. And again, they need those three things to survive: food, water, and oxygen. So if they have all those things, they're happy, and then they'll create compost. Okay, Betty. And again, the biggest reason why we want to divert our food waste from the landfill is because of climate change. Another reason is it's very expensive to create new landfills. So our food waste comprises about 40% of our garbage residentially. So that takes up a lot of space in our landfills. As I mentioned, in 2020, I think it was like 194,000 adult polar bears worth of organic waste that was sent to Winnipeg's landfill. So if we can divert that food waste or organic waste from the landfill, then we can help reduce our impact on climate change. We can reduce the need to create more landfills. And we don't want to create more landfills because it takes up space. It's expensive, it takes up space, and that space could have been a forest that had to be cut down that was home for wildlife, or it could be space for farmland, because we need to grow food. So the longer we can, the more we can increase the lifespan of our landfills, the better. And it's a little, unlike say in Europe, we have lots of space, so we're not as inclined to increase the lifespan of our landfills because we have lots of space to go make a new landfill. So it's a little harder to get that motivation sometimes. Okay, next slide. We can skip past that. Yeah, and as I mentioned, composting is an easy way to create fertilizer. So as I mentioned, the fertilizer plant here in Brandon is like the highest point source polluter of greenhouse gases in Manitoba. So if we reduce our need for synthetic, then that helps to reduce greenhouse gases, and then we don't have to spend money on very expensive fertilizer, especially right now. Fertilizer costs have recently, so that helps us save money, and we don't have to water as much, our gardens as much, and we have really delicious, wonderful, healthy plants at the end of it. As you mentioned, telling me that you didn't add compost to your garden this year, and you noticed a difference in the plants.
When I didn't fertilize the yield was significantly lower.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, next slide. So vermicomposting is another type of composting that we can do. So basically it involves a special type of worm called wigglers, and they eat the food scraps that you add to the bin. It can be done indoors, and well, most of the time, obviously you don't want to have them outside in the winter because they would die. And the lovely compost that you get at the end of it is worm poo or vermicast. And as I mentioned, it's a really great indoor option, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. Like, this is the biggest one that I have. And it's actually much more concentrated, higher in nutrient content than your compost from a backyard bin, which is really interesting. So it's, you get more bang for your buck with the vermicompost or the vermicast. Okay, next slide. And again, with backyard composting, with vermicomposting, you don't need a lot of things to get started. You need a bin like this, just a regular Rubbermaid bin from the hardware store. You need the worms, the red wiggler worms. You need shredded paper. You need those browns still. It's called bedding. Your food scraps, obviously, and then a pail for indoors to collect your food scraps. And that's it. Easy peasy. So I'll go into each step in more detail on how to choose your bin and where to get the worms from and such. Okay, go ahead, Betty. Next slide. Okay, so I thought I would go over the biology of red wiggler worms, just to talk about like where they're from, what they need, and what they like, so that if you know what they like, then you can take care of them. They're not native to Manitoba or Canada. They come from warmer climates, say California or Europe. So you cannot go into your garden and dig up an earthworm. They would not be happy in a bin like this. And the reason why is red wigglers are actually, they're surface dwellers. They like to eat organic materials, so they'll find them like underneath a rotting log or in the leaves. They don't need a lot of space to live, and they like warmer temperatures as well. Whereas an earthworm, they like cooler temperatures, so this bin would be too warm for them, and it would be too shallow. They like to really go down deep into the soil. They like to make burrows, so they'd be unhappy because their burrows would be disturbed. So they would be trying to escape out of the little air holes in the bin. So you don't want to do that. There are worm breeders who sell worms, so Smiley Worms and Brandon sells worms. So I would say that would be the best place. I know some people do sell worms like on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace as well, because they don't want them, or maybe they have too many and they want to get rid of them. So that's also another option to look at too. There are some other worms, other types of worms that can be used for vermicomposting. I think one's called a European blue nightcrawler. I can't think, maybe called that. There are a couple others, but they're not nearly as common as the red wigglers. Red wigglers, their temperature, they like room temperature. Some people ask, oh, can I put this in my basement? You can. If it's a little colder, then they just won't be as active and they may not be as happy, so they may not mate and make new babies. And sometimes people will have them outside as well in the summertime. So I can get into that a little more. And then if you notice on the pictures on the right side of the slide, those are their eggs or egg cases. So fun fact, these worms are hermaphrodites, but they still need another worm to mate with. So if you can go to the next slide. So once the worms are happy and they're fed and they're growing, they'll eventually become sexually mature, and they'll develop something called a clitellum, which is that wide band kind of behind their head. Sex ed, everyone. And then they'll go and like rub their clitellums together, and that's how they exchange sperm. And so sperm will go into the clitellum of one of the worms, and then that's where the little cocoon will develop, and then they'll shed the cocoon. So we go back to the previous slide. And the cocoon is where and we call them eggs, is where the little baby worm develops. And so as it develops, the egg will go from like a yellow to a darker color, and eventually it'll hatch out of the egg. I honestly have not seen, like, I know they're producing babies because there's lots, and I'll see different sizes of worms, but I've never seen an egg in here, which is really interesting. But sometimes you will find them in your worm bin. Yeah, and another thing about them is that they don't have lungs. So the way that they breathe is the oxygen diffuses through their skin into their body. But in order for that to happen, their skin needs to be moist. So if it's too dry, then that means they're going to suffocate. And also the same goes if it's too wet. If you have a pool of water in there, then they're going to drown as well. So they need to have just a nice moist area. And they don't have eyes, but they have light sensor cells in their skin. And so that means they're very sensitive to light. So if you open the lid to your bin, you may see some at the top of the bin, and then they'll quickly slither down to the bottom and hide from the light. So that's why, as I'll mention later on, you don't want to have a clear colored bin, you want to have like an opaque colored bin so it's nice and dark in there for them. An interesting fact is that they can actually live for up to like 4 years in captivity, which is pretty neat. And you never really see a dead worm because if one dies, then it quickly decomposes and eaten by the other worms. So, yeah. Okay, next slide. You can go to the next one. Yeah, so we'll talk more about the container. Some people can have some pretty big, fancy systems, but when starting out, we recommend not to do anything bigger than this, than what we have here, because if it tends to be a lot deeper, then the vermicompost can get really compacted, and then it can get quite smelly. So we recommend nothing deeper than this. You could have something like wider too. We also have one at work, at our office, which is about half the size, maybe a little less than half the size. So if you have even, like, don't have a lot of space, you can have something even much smaller than this, and it still works fine. You'll notice that there's a funny little contraption on the right, well, at the top, and those are they're called worm towers. And those are pretty neat because what it does is there's trays, and so you start off the worms in the bottom tray, so you put the bedding and the food in there and the worms, and then eventually they're going to eat all that food and they're going to fill it up with the vermicast. So once that's full, then you can put the food and the bedding into the tray above that, and there's holes at the bottom of each tray, so then they're going to migrate up to the next tray, and then that bottom tray is going to be empty. You can just like slide it out and harvest the finished vermicast. And there's also a little spigot over there too, on the one on the right, and that can allow excess moisture to come out of the worm tower. I think they can run for like $100 or something. I've never used it, but it seems like a pretty neat thing if you really get into vermicomposting. Okay, next slide. Oh, and I forgot to mention, just back to the container, you also want to think about where to put it in your house. So you don't want to put it in direct sunlight because that can get too hot for them. Or like you don't want to put it over top of a heating vent or something like that because it dry things out and again be too hot. Sometimes people will put their bins outside in the spring and the summer, which is totally fine, and then bring them back in when it gets too cold. Some people will also actually put their worms, like take it out of the bin and put it in their compost bin outside in the summer, and then come fall, they tend to, when they get cold, they'll like gather together for warmth. And I haven't done this myself, but they should kind of be near the top of the bin or somewhere around there. So they could be, it's supposed to be relatively easy to take them out of the compost bin and then just put them back in the small bin for indoors. So there's different options, like different things you can do with your worms. Like maybe some issues with putting your bin outside is you can get some other insects that will come into the bin, and some are fine, but some, may be carnivorous and will eat the worms, but that's just something to think of. Okay, so as we were talking about this morning, there's those two food groups. You need the greens and the browns, and so the bedding functions as a brown. So that would be like shredded paper, shredded newspaper. On the photo on the right, some of you may recognize that. It's coconut coir. You can use it in gardening, so it's like a byproduct of coconuts. And you'll get it in a brick form, and then you put it in water, and you let it soak up the water, and it expands like crazy. And I find that's actually really nice to put in the bin because it really aerates the vermicast really nicely, and I find it regulates the the moisture in the bin quite a bit. But it does cost money, whereas shredded paper is free and usually tend to have it on hand. That's how I like to get rid of confidential documents in here. The worms know all of my secrets because we don't have a shredder, so I just kind of rip it up and put it in there. So don't look too closely in here. So the bedding provides a food source for the worms, but it also provides a space to live when you first create a bin. So as you can see here, that bin is like 2/3 full with bedding. So when you start a new bin, you fill it up like 2/3 with bedding, and then you spray it down with water so it's nice and moist, and then you put the worms in there. So that creates a medium for provides a medium for the worms to live in. Because if you just put it in an empty bin, then they would quickly dry out. Another thing that the bedding does is, just like in your backyard compost bin, it aerates the pile, so it creates aeration, and it also helps to block odors, and it also helps to control moisture. So if you notice your bin is getting too wet, just add some more shredded paper. So it really helps, it soaks up that moisture. Okay, next slide. All right, so what do the worms like to eat? So it's quite similar to a backyard bin, but there are some differences. So they like fruit and veggie scraps. They can be moldy, that's totally fine. That means they're already decomposing. Tea leaves and tea bags. Coffee grounds you want to add in moderation because they're quite acidic. You can do indoor plant clippings. Eggshells are great because they're high in calcium, so it actually can help reduce the pH, so reduce the acidity in here. And they love any type of melon for some reason. That's a favorite food of theirs. I don't blame them, they're delicious. Yeah, and like in moderation, again, items that are more acidic, so tomatoes, coffee grounds, citrus fruits actually have an oil in them that the worms can't digest, or they can't, so it builds up in them, and then if you give them too much, then it can kill them. So just be moderate with how much you add. And then in moderation, breads and grains, pasta. Apparently they don't like onions and garlic as well. I don't know why, they're delicious, but. And they do eat meat, so like we say don't put meat in here because it may get stinky, but they 100% will eat meat. It's just like the issue of smell. Another worm breeder based out of eastern Manitoba was telling us a story how a friend of theirs found a skull, and he wanted some of the flesh to be cleaned off, so they put it in one of their worm piles, like it's a compost pile or manure pile, and it has worms in it. And it was like 2 days later, they took it out, and the skull was like actually kind of mushy because it was decomposing quite quickly. So they realized, okay, don't do that in the worm pile. It was really interesting. I never thought that would be a thing, but so they for sure eat meat. Again, you don't put whole eggs, dairy products, oily foods, just like your backyard bin. And as well, no pet waste or diseased plants because those pathogens won't be killed off in the bins. And no synthetic products as well. Okay, next page. Okay, so once you have all your stuff, all your equipment, there are certain steps that you have to follow, or you have to build your bin. So as I mentioned, we all know the worms need oxygen to survive, so you need to have holes in your bin. So the lid here has holes. The bottom of this bin, so there's 2 bins stacked. The bottom has holes, and then the sides just around here have holes all around them. So you drill the holes. Some people don't put holes in the bottom of their bin. So if you have holes in the bottom of your bin, It's a nice way, if you have excess moisture, it's a nice way for the moisture to just seep out, and you don't have to worry about your bin getting too wet. Obviously, you need a lid or another bin underneath to catch that moisture, but some people feel comfortable not doing that, and they don't put holes in the bottom of their bin. And some people don't even actually use lids too. They'll have like maybe some thick cardboard at the top of the bin, like at the top of the vermicast, or thick pages of newspaper, because that does the job as well. So you drill the holes, and then you have to fill the bin with bedding, as I mentioned, and make sure you moisten the bedding, because if you put dry paper, then it's going to dry out. And then you add the food. So a common question is like, how much food do you add and how often do you add it? So I would say that's a disadvantage about vermicomposting is with like compared to backyard composting. Backyard composting, you can put as much material in your bin as you want. It doesn't matter. But if you add too much in your bin at once, food scraps are full of moisture, so they're going to add a lot of moisture to the bin. So you don't want to just pile it with a bunch of food scraps. The less, the better, I say. So I personally don't feed the worms more than once every 2 weeks. What I like to do is if it's been 2 weeks, then I'll check the bin, and if there's still food scraps in there, then I won't add anymore, and I'll wait another week, just because, again, I don't want to make it too wet in there. And basically, I will just move the vermicast to the side. Ooh, there's mushrooms in here. I'll just move the can everyone see? Don't want to do it too far. Just move it to the sorry. I'll just move it to the side, and then just cover that whole side with food scraps. And then you always want to cover the food scraps with the vermicast that you moved aside, or with shredded paper. Again, that stops you from getting fruit flies, and it stops from getting gross odors. So that's very important. Oh, and then you add the worms. Easy peasy. So yeah, I pretty much talked about how to feed the worms. Something you can do, I don't think it really matters though. You can if 1 week you add food on this side, the next week you can add food on this side. I don't know, that was a rule that we had in our presentation, but I don't think it really matters to me either way. Yeah, and I find some people are worried that their worms are going to starve, and eventually they will if you don't feed them enough, but I know some people who've gone on vacation for 3 weeks and they load up the bin because they're worried that the worms will starve, and then they came back and their worms were dead because it was too wet in there. Again, you just feed them as much as you normally would if you're gone for 3 weeks, and they'll be totally fine. Okay, next. Something that I just forgot that I want to mention was your worm populations will increase if they're happy and they're mating. And eventually, if you want to really increase your worm population, eventually they're only going to increase as much as their environment can support them. So you can get a new bin and then take some worms from your current bin and put them in your new bin, and then those ones will start reproducing, and it'll be increasing your population even more. So yeah. And something that I notice, they really like to get it on the sides of the bin. So it'll get nice and moist in here. And it's not wet right now. Oh, there's one little guy. Tend to get lots of moisture around the edges, and that's when they'll tend to go on the sides, and then they'll do their mating on the sides for some reason. Yeah, so it's interesting to see that. Oh, there's a little dead baby. Oh dear. Let's not look at that. Yeah, so it's pretty neat to see that. Okay, so like right now, I think the bin, well, it's almost half full. So I could harvest the vermicast now, but I'm lazy and it takes time, so I'm not doing it yet. But like really, within 2 months of starting your bin, 2 to 3 months, you would have enough to harvest. So there's a variety of different ways to do it. What's really neat is the food migration method. So it's kind of similar to what you do with that worm tower. So you can, shove aside all the vermicast to like one side of the bin, and then put some melons, like their favorite foods. Put that on the empty side, and put the lid back on, and let them do their thing. And eventually, most of them are going to migrate to where the melons are. And then you're going to have this nice vermicast takeout, and it won't have any worms. You can still look for some stragglers or like some eggs or whatever. Another way is called a light method. So again, I mentioned they don't like light. So you take the lid off, you shine a flashlight. Well, you don't actually have to shine a flashlight the first time. They'll go deeper into the vermicast. You kind of scrape off the first 2 inches, harvest that, shine a flashlight, let them grow down deeper, and then do the same thing. And then just pick through the rest or just leave it. What I tend to do is the dump in hand sort. So in that picture, you just dump it in onto a lid and then just pick all the worms out, and then you've got your wormless vermicast. Okay, next slide. Again, with your backyard compost, you can use your compost quite similarly. You can put it use it on your indoor plants, your outdoor plants. I find with vermicast, it tends to dry out really quickly if you don't, if you let it sit, and it tends to get very hard. So I like to mix it into the soil really quickly. And that's something I'd like to ask you, like how to avoid that from happening, or how best to store the vermicast if you're not using it. Do you have an answer right now? Okay, so like those beneficial organisms are no longer in the vermicompost after 2 years. Yeah, okay, so basically, if you don't want to use it right away, then you can store it in a bag with air holes. Oh, so interesting. Same thing. It's all that bacterial activity, or yeah. Okay, and then and don't store it in the sun as well. Okay, great tips. Thank you. Yes. That's a good question. I don't know. Like to start the seeds, and then, does anyone know that answer? Can you put it on top of the microgreen seeds, or put the, and then harvest the microgreens from that? Because it needs more soil, right? Because it would probably burn, would it? Or they wouldn't have the right type of, it needs soil. Okay. Okay, good point. Yeah, so for those online, the question was, can you use pure vermicompost or vermicast to like seed and grow microgreens? But no, they need more than that. And when we say you can use it to make potting soil, we say no more than like a quarter of the volume of the potting soil, which is what you're saying too, like 25, no more than 25%. Yeah, and like, again, just like with your backyard compost, I like to mix it into the top of my, the soil of my potted plants or outdoor garden. You can use it to make compost tea as well. Again, you can put it at the bottom of seeding trenches or at the bottom of holes, like planting holes for your new plants that you're planting. And again, you can spread it onto your lawn as well, just like we talked about with the backyard compost. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So we've talked about how to go about composting, how to build your bin, and I've kind of mentioned here and there some of the problems that people face. And one of the biggest ones is the bin gets too wet. And again, that's usually because people add too much food at once. So if you notice it's really wet, you can even just pour some of it out of your bin if it's super wet. Or you can just add a bunch of shredded paper, and that will really help to suck up all that moisture. Some person, they had 2 bins this big of red wigglers, and she donated them to us because she didn't want them anymore. It was too much for her to take care of. It was so gross. He took the lid off. It was so wet, and all you heard was like, because the worms were all right at the top because they were trying to get away from the water, and it smelled so bad. It was so gross. But luckily, one of my colleagues, he's super into vermicomposting, so he took them home and he rehabilitated and rehomed them, and they're super, super happy after that. So don't let it happen. So gross. So yeah, just don't feed them too much, and if there's too much moisture, just add some more shredded paper. People are worried about the worms escaping. So the only reason they're going to escape is if they're unhappy. So again, that's if it's too wet. They may try and get out of the air holes, or maybe too acidic. So if you find it's maybe too acidic, you may know that's too acidic is because you'd find something called potworms. So it's kind of a small picture, but on the top right-hand corner is a picture that has all these little tiny white worms. And so they're not bad, like they're like the red wigglers, they're decomposers. But if there's a lot of them, it may be a sign that it's too acidic. They like more acidic conditions. So as I mentioned, eggshells, you can crush them up and add them to the bin to help reduce the acidity because they're very basic. And again, just be conscious of like what acidic foods you're adding, because you may be adding foods that are too acidic. As I mentioned, fruit flies. If you make sure that you put the shredded paper or the vermicast over top of that and those new foods you're adding, then you shouldn't have a problem, although sometimes it still happens, but it's a very good way to prevent fruit flies. And again, odors. Make sure you're putting that shredded paper over top of the food scraps, and don't add meat or anything, and then you shouldn't have any issues with odors. Like after this, you guys, whoever wants, you can come and look, and you can put your nose in there and take a nice whiff, and it just smells like dirt, or it smells like nature. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, so if the worms, the worms aren't too cold, like they're warm, they're fed, it's not too wet, it's not too acidic, then they're going to be super happy and they're not going to try to escape. Sometimes I'll randomly see a dead, dried up worm on the floor next to the bin. I don't know why it happened. Maybe they're feeling very adventurous, but I don't know. Okay, I do have quiet on here. because it was a really weird situation. I don't know if it was quiet or it was the noise or the vibrations, but my husband, he likes speakers, and so we have these nice speakers set up throughout our living room. And I put the worms on the floor next to a speaker, and I don't know, that night we were watching TV or listening to music. And then the next morning, I came downstairs and I saw there was a bunch of worms on the floor, dead, beside the bin. I'm like, what the heck happened? And my only thought is they didn't like the sound coming or vibration coming from the speaker. So I think they like darkness and quiet. So yeah, they have dark, quiet, pH range is like 5 to 9. Optimal temperature range is 15 to 25 degrees. They'll be nice and happy. Okay, next slide. Oh, yeah, I like this little quote. Sometimes climate change, it feels very overwhelming, and sometimes it feels like just if we're doing things that are good for the environment, it's not enough. But I really like this quote, like, small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. So keep up the good work, everyone, for either keeping up your composting or learning how to do it. And yeah. And I think that's, yeah. So does anyone have any questions? You can definitely come up and look at the bin if you would like. Don't be shy. Anyone? Yeah, 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 come on. Yeah, so if you want to smell, it doesn't really smell like much. So there's some on the side. Oh, that one's kind of dying. Oh, there's that guy. Yeah, take a picture. They can be a lot smaller. That's a good question. I think it's normal. It's just some, it's fungus that's growing in there. It's another decomposer. And I haven't disturbed it recently, so yeah.
And I think it's not because it was too loud, it was because of the vibration, because it imitates the rain.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's a really good, I learned something new today.
Yeah, I learned
Yeah.
it in school.
Okay. Well, now I know something new. That's awesome. Thank you. Huh. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what was that?
I see some numbers.
Oh. It's okay. Okay, so where are we? They usually
Oh, I think they're meeting.
getting it on. So you'll usually find them around the food. And it's kind of cold in here right now, but sometimes it gets really warm. Oh, yeah. There's a lot. Want to hold a worm?
Yes.
Yeah, they're so cute.
Do you want to hold one?
They're very small.
They're very small, very small. Yeah. Okay. Oh. Oh. Yeah.
He doesn't know what to make of it.
What is this? You want one? Yeah, do it.
I always thought they were bigger.
Y'all know, hey? And they can get big.
All right. I just don't think
Yeah, just put it back in.
it wouldn't be very good for fishing at all.
No. You just destroy it with the hook.
I mean, I've seen
Yeah, they're not near as big as I
I've
thought.
seen
Oh,
Pictures, and like they seem to be. I always thought they were way bigger.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're cute.
I wonder if they ever.
I think they. Do you want to come this way and see? Yeah.
Oh my god, this is super
Yeah.
I've never seen one.
Oh, you haven't? Oh.
So that's about as big as they get then.
Yeah. Look, well, it's funny.
In the picture, sorry, it looked
They look bigger. Yeah.
But nothing to compare. Like, I
True.
always saw puffins, pictures of puffins, and I always thought they were like
Big, and then they're really small.
really disappointed when I saw
I
them.
know. Jordana, can you turn this off? Just press that button. So I just want. Oh.
Okay, we're going to get a break in just a minute. I think Kristen has just another couple little things she wants to mention before we take our break.
I forgot to mention that this book is so good, Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff. And it is, I know it's available at the Winnipeg Library. I don't know about the Brandon Library. It is? Okay, yeah. So it was very, very useful in learning how to vermicompost. And it has, like our pamphlet has some good information, but this has like really detailed information if you really want to get into it. And she even talks about how some people have made worm boxes for their house and made it into a coffee table as well. So it's very creative ideas for worm bins. So yeah, so it's.
She also has a book for teachers. So
Yes.
if you know anybody or if you're a teacher, there are all kinds of classroom activities that you can do with your vermicomposter in the classroom.
Yeah, it's really useful, really
Yeah, extremely,
great.
yeah.
Yeah,
It was my go-to.
I know, yeah, okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well, thanks again, everyone, and let me know if you have any questions later on, and yeah.
You can take a photo of this book if you want to.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so our panel is next, but they're not until 1:30. So we have a bit of a break. So there's cookies and goodies. There's coffee and tea. Anything else you want, we'll see what we can do for you. If you touched the worms and you want to sanitize. I was going to say sanctify. Oh, sanitize your hands. There is a sanitizer back at the back table. So now is another opportunity to network and talk to the folks that are sitting next to you, or get up and go talk to somebody else and find out what they're doing in their garden and what they think about vermicomposting and all that good stuff. And of course, Kristen is here to ask more questions.
And I found a pot worm. It's actually on my finger if anyone wants to see it. It's tiny. A pot worm, those little worms I was telling you that show up in it's super tiny.
Really small.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very small.
So how would it get in there?
Good question. I don't know.
So is that a baby worm or is that an adult worm?
I think pot worms are just, no, not really. I don't,
I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes to finish whatever conversation you're on. All of our panelists are here now, so we can get started with the next part. So if you give us just a few minutes, and there's coffee and tea and goodies at the back, so help yourself, and we'll start in 2 minutes and counting. While we're gathering, I'll also remind you that this is being live streamed and recorded. So if after this is over, you say, that was so cool and my friends need to see this too, or, you know, I forgot what Kristen said about that, then you can just access the live stream. It's recorded. You just go to Knox United Church Brandon. You have to make sure you put in Brandon because there's a lot of Knox United churches. So Knox United Church Brandon, and then if you scroll, you get to the first page, you scroll down to Knox Connection. And if you click on that, that'll take you to all of the things that are on the YouTube channel. And this, because it's only just been recorded, should be one of the first things at the top of the list. So hopefully you'll be able to find it. I think there's probably a search mechanism. Shouldn't be too hard to find. So yes, so you can look at this again next week, or the week after, or next year. That's the beauty of YouTube, eh? Oh, very good question, Karen. Karen asked me if there were any more programs happening, any more workshops, and yes, there is. On Sunday, March 5th, we'll be at the Riverbank Discovery Center, and we will have the first workshop will be from 1:30 to 2:30, and it is green household cleaning, and then there will be a half-hour break, and the next workshop will be, and I always, buy less, fix more, trade often. Okay, so that, and you don't have to come to both, you can one to the other. The one thing about that is it's not being recorded. So if you can't come that day, you're gonna miss it. But I'll take good notes, so give me a call. No, I'll tell you my notes. Okay, so maybe if I could have my panelists come on up here. We have Cody Ray from Neo Newts, microgreen business, and Marcia Ham Weeb from the Samaritan House, Lindsay Hargraves from the city of Brandon, Kristen Malik is going to join us from the Green Action Team, and Martin Dupuis from Smiley Worms. Okay, so I'm going to give you a use. Not yet, because we have to save the battery, right? But so I think, hello, yeah. I think what we'll do is that we will just go in this order. So we'll start down there with Marcia. Marcia is with the Samaritan House, and she is going to talk about the vermicomposting program that they're doing there at the food bank.
Green. Button is green. Okay, so yes, I'm the food bank coordinator at Samaritan House Ministries, who, depending on where people are watching from, that's the food bank in Brandon. And yes, we are vermicomposting for about a year, and my partner Martin is here on this panel, and he's the person, my business partner, Martin. The worm business partner, he offered to help mentor our vermicomposting, and we bought some worms from him about a year ago, and I started out with 4 tubs, much like we saw in the workshop, and now I'm up to about 16 tubs because my purpose has been to grow and have lots of reproduction with the worms so that I can have more and more food waste from the food bank being transformed right in our facility so that we can then move those worm castings as fertilizer into our community garden program. So that's the goal. My little joke at work is that the hardworking worms are the least complaining employees we have at the food bank. They love turning garbage into lovely stuff. Where the rest of us get grossed out by garbage, the worms don't. So I'm very thankful for them. So it is a big goal of my work at the food bank to move toward zero waste and to move toward diverting as much as possible from the landfill. So we obviously divert a lot of food from the landfill, also a lot of plastic products and a lot of cardboard. And I had a whole reusable bag thing going on for a while there, so I brought along a bunch of compostable bags. If someone wants them, they can have them. Otherwise, I give them to Cody. And we share food waste with farmers as well as with the vermicomposting because the worms can't keep up with the amount of food waste that comes in on the perishable food that we get. And yeah, I'm just starting the screening process. So I brought along some screenings from the bins that I pulled out about 2 weeks ago to make sure I didn't bring along any critters that didn't want to be in public today. And I'm working on a lot with dealing with the balance of making sure that, as we learned in the workshop today, which was really helpful for learning, even if you're on the go with it, that the balance of how wet, how dry, which kind of critters are along with your worms. And I have a really big fruit fly problem right now that I'm struggling with in a whole bunch of different ways. So it is teaching me a lot about balance, working with the worms. So I really enjoy it. I love it more than I thought I ever would, being that it is a bit gooey sometimes to be working with critters like worms, but I think about them all the time. Like, oh, the worms would love that. They hear me say at the food bank, oh, the worms would love that. So they get a lot of airplay in their food bank world. So I think I just pass on and people can ask questions later, so I make sure we have lots of time for everybody to talk.
Hi everybody, my name is Cody Ray. I am the founder and operation manager of Neo Newts Market. We are a Brandon-based urban vertical farm that we operate year-round. So we specialize in microgreens, which I have some sunflowers here, and aquaponically grown leafy greens, which aquaponics is, Aquaponics is the combination of raising fish and growing plants without the use of soil, so we use lava stone. Inside of the lava stone, there's 3 main bacteria that process the fish waste, or the ammonia, turn it into nitrite, which is a plant-accessible nutrient, which accelerates our plant growth. We're able to grow a head of leafy greens in 1/3 of the time, and because of the water's constantly recirculating, we use 97% less water with these methods. We were lucky enough to work with a few different businesses locally. Chez Angela is a bakery downtown here in Brandon that we sell our microgreens out of. For every salad kit of microgreens we sell, I donate 1 ounce of freshly grown microgreens to the Samaritan House Food Bank. I have to say one of my favorite parts of my job is being able to drop these off because I grew up myself accessing food banks and knowing that the nutritional density of the microgreens themselves is going into much needed homes. During the busiest part of the season, I think we dropped off around 4 pounds in 1 month, and that was a massive tub. And Marcia messaged me that day and said every single sprout found its home, so it is being used, and I'm ever so blessed to have that. This is about a year we've been dropping off every single month with you. For our microgreens, from seed to harvest is anywhere from 7 to 10 days. So I'm actually leaching very little nutrients out of the living soil itself. If anything, when we throw a spent tray that's been harvested into the green bin and Martin picks it up, it's probably a bit more nutritional for the worms when it goes to his farm. However, when we put all of our spent trays in the green bins, he turns it into vermicompost, returning it back to us as living soil. And we try to, in that sense, have very little waste even when it comes down to our soil. Very happy to work with Martin since the very beginning. I, from the early on, used HP dried bales of soil. And the difference between the Pro Mix HP and Martin's living soil, the plants looked so much happier. The vibrancy on them too, they almost had like a wax coat. So I would have to say the benefits plants get from living soil is absolutely immense. Pass that on, or
Try to. I have one on me. Here, put one down.
Okay, my name is Lindsay Hargraves. I am the city's Environmental Initiatives Coordinator, and I am to talk to you today about the Green Cart program. And I don't have a PowerPoint or anything. I thought I'd keep it simple because the way that the Green Cart program started in 2011 was just a simple conversation on an airplane between a colleague from the province and a colleague of the city. They said, you know what, Brandon would be a really good size to do a pilot project for an organics pickup program. And so then getting applications and funding, a year later, got 500 participants to participate in the pilot program. What we accept is everything but pet waste, meat and dairy. And from there it grew. Now we have 10,000 households in the program. And just to give context, the city picks up 16,000 households. So we're over halfway of nearly every household that the city services that has a Green Cart program. And in 2022, we diverted 2,219 tons of organics of just the Green Cart program. The operation side of things, it only runs from April to November because it freezes in the winter. And Marcia knows how difficult it is to try and just offer a offshoot pickup program. It doesn't really work. It's not the same equipment. It doesn't keep it outside. It's hard to manually empty. So we're not quite there with the year-round pickup. It's all done in windrows, the compost turner, everything's tested, temperatures, levels are all taken throughout the year. It's tested, comes back as a really good product. We call it a soil amendment, and it's used at the landfill. Our Parks Department uses it, and then people can also purchase it and mix it 3-to-1 with soil. What else was I going to say in these notes? If you want to sign up for a Green Cart, you can visit the website or call 729-2281 and do that preferably around this time of year so that when everything starts melting, you'll be first on the list to get your Green Cart. There's now new developments. It's all pretty much, they're all coming with Green Carts already instead of people having to ask for it. It is a voluntary program, and that is to reduce the contamination level. So people that want to be in the program, so that helps. Future, we were hoping that commercial-wise, that private sector would want to pick up commercial businesses, food waste. We may explore that with a pilot program in the coming years. Right now, we're going to be focusing on how to market the end product so that we're not having to stockpile it and then make that part really successful. Because we're really good at collecting it now. You got to be really good at getting rid of it. So yes, it's helped extend the life of the landfill, and I've been kind of connected to each and every one of you. Well, your organization, not you, but well, yeah, that is the city's Green Cart program in a very short nutshell.
I've got one attached to me. Is this oh, it is working. Oh, Betty, could you go to the beginning of that PowerPoint? It was there and then it changed. So basically, I'm coming from a Winnipeg perspective because, as we mentioned, Winnipeg does not have a compost pickup service. And some of you, and I mentioned earlier on that Green Action Center's social enterprise, Compost Winnipeg, was created back in 2016 because there was a need for an organic waste pickup system. But also back in 2016, the compost program started a project called the On-Site Multifamily Composting Project. And it was born out of the need to provide people living in multifamily buildings, so like apartments or condos, with an option for composting. Nowadays, Compost Winnipeg is a lot bigger and has a lot more capacity, so they are servicing a lot of multifamily buildings, but they've also now reached a plateau where they can't take any more customers because it's hard to find more people to work for them because it's really hard to find people to work. So again, there's still a lack of capacity for composting for certain people. So this was like a 3-year project, and we received funding from a variety of sources. And basically, we provided all of the tools and the resources and the training for free to 11 multifamily buildings to set up composting on site on their property. So they're doing backyard composting. And I'll just like quickly go over it because this may be something I know in the city of Brandon, multifamily buildings aren't serviced with the green cart collection program. So this could be something that folks can think of to do here. So Betty, if you want to just go to the next. I won't go through the project goals. We can go on to the next. So basically, in order for a building to be eligible, they obviously had to be in Winnipeg, and they needed to have 2 volunteers to run the program. So they couldn't be in the same unit, they had to be in separate units because for insurance purposes, in case like one of the main volunteers moved away, they still had that other volunteer there to manage the program. They, of course, needed available space on their property, and there had to be interest and approval from the residents, as well as the building managers or owners, obviously. Okay, next slide, please. And there was no, the selling points was there's no cost to the building up front, because the grant provided everything for free. And if, like a lot of buildings, when they're trying to entice new tenants, it gave the building some really great green credibility. And for the managers, the building managers, they didn't have to do anything. It was volunteers who they were responsible for taking care of all of the... Oh, there we go. I can just talk. Oh, there we go. And one of the biggest fears that building managers have, as I mentioned before, is that compost is going to attract rodents. So with our training, with Green Action Center's training, it helped give them some peace of mind in that we told them like a well-managed bin does not attract rodents or mice. So those were like the big selling points to encourage building owners to say yes to this. Okay, next slide. And then there's some animations, so you can just kind of... So we provided compost bins for free. Oh, if you can stop right there, Betty. Can you go back? We provided compost, the wooden 3 compost bin systems, and those were built by a landscaping company that's no longer around in Winnipeg. So that was really key, partnering with someone who would create or build the bins. And then the other tools, like you can go next again, Betty. We provided the compost aerator, keep on fridge magnets, so people had the magnets on their fridges to know what they could and couldn't put in the bin. We had a booklet, provided them with kitchen catchers. You can keep going, Betty, just and stickers to put on the kitchen catchers, and even flyers and posters to put in the building. So they'd be posted, given to each resident, and then also they'd be posted throughout the building saying, hey, you have composting at your building, these are your volunteer managers if you have any questions, and this is the location of where the bin is. And then we also gave them signs like that to have at the outdoor bin, which again, it reminds people of what they can and cannot put in the bin. And then there was also, we provided a backyard composting presentation for the residents and a training session for the volunteers who are managing the program. So that, again, that everyone was aware of the program and what could and cannot be put into the bin and how to manage the compost bin. And then we've had provided ongoing support once they installed their bins. And there's still some buildings that we still provide support with and still communicate with. Okay, next. And that's just an example of the sign that we had out there. And it gives a list of the different browns that you can use in the bin. Okay. Yeah, so that's okay. Like basically, people would just collect the food scraps in their kitchen catchers, and then it works differently in different buildings. Residents will just go out to the outdoor bin and empty their food scraps. In one of the buildings, the volunteers on a certain day will go to each participating unit and will collect the food scraps, and then they will empty them into the bin. And that's a good way for them to, I guess, check for contamination and kind of communicate and speak with the participating residents. Okay. So yeah, there was, as I mentioned, there's 11 buildings in 3 years. One stopped because they had mice, but again, they're on the river. They back onto the river, and they've always had mice problems, but the owners of the building were blaming the compost bin for the mice. And then there's another building that has temporarily delayed or stopped the use of the bins, again, because they have a mouse problem in one of their buildings. So need to go and check their compost bin. And we reached about 905 people, and there was an estimated 4,420 liters of food waste diverted per building per year. So that avoided more than 25 tons of CO2e emissions. So yeah, it was pretty cool. And there's condos, life leases, and apartments. It was neat to look at the survey results and how a lot of the residents were saying that it actually really helped to build community in their building, because kind of like gathering at the water cooler, instead you go gather at the compost bin, and it got kind of the volunteers working together, and of course there wasn't 100% participation in the buildings, but it got the people involved in the compost program, communicating and gathering, so that was pretty cool. Okay, you can go to the next one. Challenges are finding funders to offset the costs. We found 3 years of funding, but that was it, and we haven't been able to fund it since. And so the cost of starting a compost bin can be, this whole program can be quite costly. And it can be a lot of work for volunteers too. And the transitory nature of a rental or rental units or multifamily buildings can create a problem with having the same volunteers, dedicated volunteers. And the most successful buildings so far have been 55 plus buildings, because those folks are staying there for quite some time, and a lot of them are retired as well, so they have the time to dedicate to managing the program. And then again, the worries about the rodents, that's another big issue right there. Okay, next slide. And I will say our most successful building, they have over half of the units in the building are participating, and it keeps on growing, and that's a 55 plus building, so it's pretty cool. And yeah, if you just want to go through, these are the different buildings that are participating, you can keep going through, Betty. And you can see there's different spaces, they just squeezed in a space there in the West Broadway area, more inner city area, and they actually drilled holes in the concrete below that bin to allow the moisture to leach into the soil below. And this one, I think they have 3 sets. So yeah, it's pretty neat. There's definitely been some buildings that are expanding their bins, and there's one building where they do their compost program in the summer, and then in the winter they receive Compost Winnipeg pickup, because it gets a little too much in the winter. So yeah, it's a pretty neat program. Unfortunately, It's been tough for us to start it up again, and there's always interest from other buildings to get started, but again, it'd have to be at their own cost because we haven't been able to get new funding for it. So, but yeah, it's something to think about as an option. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Martin Dupuy, and I started a business called Smiley Worms. I was lucky you guys just watched a presentation on pretty much exactly what I do every day. Thank you. The only difference is we do it on a larger scale, like more like semi-loads as opposed to your little bin at home you would have. We also do other things. We're spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to divert items that might be destined for the landfill that could be repurposed for something else. So later on, I think they've given me a few moments to kind of give you a little more detail on what we do and how we do it, and maybe I'll save some of it for that, but that kind of, in short, creating products and worms that push this agenda, I guess, keeping things out of the landfill. Thanks.
Okay, so now is the time to ask questions. If you have a question, I would like you to speak loudly so I can hear you, but also let me know who it is you're directing your question to. Okay, so are there any questions? Pardon me? Oh, just scratching your head. It's a good thing we're not at an auction. You sold! Megan has a question. Can I repeat that question? So, a live stream. The question is, we have seen the microgreens in plastic containers, I assume clamshells, and the question is there a way to get them into a different container?
So we actually do a bi-weekly subscription through our storefront too. Everything comes in glass mason jars, and we actually do like a glass exchange at the door, kind of like an old school milkman. And that way we get away from single-use plastics. And then if you give me back my glass jars, I don't have to buy more. I don't charge delivery for that. And it's every second Thursday that we do that. So you're probably referring to the clamshells out of like Chez Angela, and that's just out of James, his own request is how he wanted them to be sold out of his location. So I try when I can get away from single-use plastics, but will always fill the need of my customer if they request it. So.
Perfect. Awesome. And we do know now that we once again are allowed to recycle clamshell plastic. It's not the perfect, this is much better answer, but it is good to be able to recycle them again. Dave?
Cody, in a strictly purely business sense, did you mention the word delivery?
Dave was asking if Cody really said the word delivery.
Yes, I sure did. We deliver every second Thursday to our subscription. That also includes the lettuce as well too.
Yes.
Cody, I saw your microgreens at Co-op. Will that be regular, and also is that the best place to get your lettuce if I don't want a subscription?
We also have our storefront open every Saturday from 10 till 2, right, 752 on First Street. But we, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Will I be able to get them regularly at Co-op?
Co-op will be holding, right now we're growing indoors with our aquaponics, but this March we actually have acquired
That's Rob.
Yeah, it's on. Anyways, this March we'll be launching a sea can also that will be able to produce 3,580 heads of lettuce out of it every single month. That will be launching in March. It's back off again.
Locally grown food.
Yes.
So Lindsay, you talked about remediated soil.
Can you repeat the question?
Can you want me to repeat? Okay. You asked about how to get the soil amendment / compost. You can go out to the landfill. If you wanted a ton of it, it's like $29, but they prorate that back if you just wanted like a 5-gallon pail. So it'd be like no more than like around $5. We usually try at least once a year to give it away for free. If the weather and everything works out for Compost Awareness Week at the beginning of May, we'll usually hold an event where we give some away for free.
We have a couple of big garbage cans that we put in the back of the car and go and fill it. I don't think it's ever cost us more than $5. Yeah, so it's pretty remarkable, really. Yeah. Easy too, very easy.
We think it's working, yes. I wanted to add a couple things to Lindsay's comment there, that the soil is also, the compost, that's generated from the Green Cart program is offered free of charge to all the community garden sites. So there's a number of gardeners in Brandon that access that as well. So that's also a really good benefit to all the people who are gardening in the community. And a lot of composting happens at those garden sites as well. Specifically, I know the one about Samaritan House. We have a large composting site, which is not really very well maintained. However, we do deal with our own garden debris there, because I forgot to mention that before. And then there's a very tiny, in my opinion, very tiny composting program going on within city buildings, which I have access to that information because I know someone who works in one of those buildings and I can control what they put in their food cycler. I will not put that out on the World Wide Web. But anyway, so that food cycler turns compost from snacks at this building into dried peat moss looking objects.
Compost fluff.
Compost fluff. Compost fluff. And so I utilize the compost fluff that I can snag out of that particular process and put it into my worm bins. So we have a lot of good partnerships going on with the city, and one of them is that, the compost fluff. And yes, we did try to run a green cart program out of the food bank in the winter, and that was an adventure I do not want to repeat. And I'm sure the guy picking it up doesn't want to either, so we tried. Oh, and also people who do not have access to any sort of composting, in the season when the yard waste bins are open, you can take your kitchen waste to the yard waste bins. But it probably seems kind of tedious to carry a little tiny container of kitchen waste to a great big bin. I don't know. But that is one way you can do composting without accessing a backyard bin or a vermicomposting bin.
Or you can, if you have a friend who has a big green bin and you say, could I put my stuff in? Absolutely. I know we have a couple, 3 people who live in apartments who will bring their stuff to our bin. Wayne.
Not exactly. So the city only services 6 units or under. And then otherwise you're getting kind of with the commercial industry. However, I've had, it might be like 55 plus or in a condo area, and someone, we have a green cart. And I said, if you have someone that is gonna be the champion of that green cart, I will convince people to come pick up that green cart, but you have to be the champion, and if anything goes wrong, then it's gonna be probably gone. So not exactly full-time like how Kristen explained about the Green Action Center. Hopefully in the coming years that might be something, but we did run into a problem with just the garbage and recycling that we were servicing. Had bins that have like 100 bins on their site, and so I'm going to go back to just like a big yard depot bin, and there's also increase in contamination with that as well.
Yeah, I believe that would be one of the issues with doing and that's why I think that the Green Action Center, their program, they had 2 volunteers who were specifically there to kind of help make sure that that didn't happen, that made sure everybody was educated and made sure that everybody knew what could and couldn't go in, and made sure what went in was not stuff that shouldn't be there. Because contamination, of recycling bins and composting bins is a pretty serious issue. And so people think they're doing a great thing, but they put the wrong thing in their recycling bin, and then that just contaminates the whole bin.
But that might be where this multi-family
It could be, I'm a strong advocate if you can reduce it on site. So like how Marcia partnered with Martin to do that on site, leave the complicated logistics of picking up a cart out of our hands is much better.
Yeah. Well, and in the long run, it's more cost effective too, for sure. And ownership, when you have ownership of your green bin or that your facility's green bin, that always works better.
Well, we have a number of people at Crocus Gardens, but we should maybe.
Absolutely. Yep.
I had a question. Oh, hello. How is the green bin program or green cart program funded? Like, how's it paid for? Like, is it?
By everybody.
For
Taxpayer
sure.
dollars is how it's.
How much?
Taxpayer.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like property taxes?
Yeah,
or?
property taxes. It was started off with funding from the province through what used to be called Green Manitoba, and also through the RARS levy through the landfill. We get like a little bit of money back each year for how much we divert out of the landfill for programs like that, but majority is through tax dollars.
Okay, property tax. Because do you have a waste diversion fee? And no, Winnipeg does, but Brandon maybe not.
No.
No, okay.
Green cart program that you run in Winnipeg, it's not for everyone, but I guess it's run all year round.
Yes, run out all year round. So what they do is they, when Compost Winnipeg empties the green bin, they put in a new compostable bag that lines the bin, so you don't get things stuck to the side of the bin. But I obviously, if it's a city-run thing, that wouldn't happen. So I'm curious. Obviously, you know way more than I do. I'm curious how other cities do that in the winter, because
We do organic waste collection year-round, and what we do is we use a liner in the bins or wood chips on the bottom of the bins, and if they've been sitting in the cold for a while, it's a trick to get them empty. We wash them, and then we bring them back clean with a new liner, and it's just, we couldn't figure out any other way to have a clean bin. It's just, you just have to wash them every week and then send them back clean. So.
yeah, and Compost Winnipeg doesn't wash the bins. That's something they won't do. Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Wayne. No, I think he's just.
Currently, I'm using 24 ornamental koi. However, you can use tilapia or any other edible types of fish. Just while we got into this new commercial space and the aquaponics actually matured, there's the nitrogen cycle, which can spike certain chemicals that could be, precarious for most fish. The koi are a bit more hardy, and during their maturity, it's a bit better to start off with a bit more hardy type of fish. Been recently looking into getting tilapia, as there's fingerlings that we can have shipped from BC. So every 6 months, 6 to 7 months, we could have a few hundred pounds of fish on top of our produce.
Do you eat the fish? Do you harvest the fish?
The ornamental koi right now, no.
Oh, okay.
However, there are people who will eat koi, but
Well,
it's
true.
like considered like a bottom feeder. So they're not the best quality of meat, but they are edible.
Yeah.
Well, we have a presentation plan. I kind of looped them in there.
You have a presentation, Brian?
Well, we had they've asked us to provide 5 minutes.
Okay, this is your turn.
Okay, I have a slide.
Okay, so Betty, if you want to put on the smiley worm slide presentation? Oh, he's bringing it to you, I guess. Are there any other questions for any of our other panelists while we're waiting for that?
Talk at the Brandon University, but
Yes.
I don't feel like it quite fit this thing.
Sorry, say that again?
Is the Green Action Center only in Winnipeg?
Yes, look where our office is based, it's in Winnipeg. But we do work throughout Manitoba.
Holly's working a 12-hour shift, and I've got the baby.
Do we have events in Brandon? Aside from this, not very often. It's only if like someone asks us to come out and pays us to come out, so yeah.
If somebody wanted the Green Action out, you could talk to me, we'll find a way to get them out here. Okay, so keep that in mind.
I guess thanks for inviting us. Seeing the crowd and the questions is like, obviously I'm in the right crowd. I guess just to get started, we're just southwest of Brandon, and what we do is we mostly raise worms and sell them either locally or online. But when you raise worms, you get byproducts such as vermicompost, and then it's kind of a slippery slope. One thing leads to another where you end up discovering other items that were destined for the landfill that you can create other products with it. Yeah, we're kind of a family-based business. My wife does all the books, and if you ever email or call or whatever, it's usually her you're going to talk to. Most of our products are chemical-free, and once you get into this space, you understand all the benefits, and you realize that maybe some chemicals aren't needed at all. You can do a lot of things organically, and it works. It's pretty productive. So, just a little background on me. I started Little Italy in '94, and I sold it in 2017. And while I owned it, we were getting a ton of organic waste materials. Like, okay, what are we going to do with this? And like a lot of people, you think there's got to be a better way to handle these things. Just sending it to the landfill or shipping your cardboard to China is like, okay, this doesn't really make any sense. There's got to be a way to manage it that it'll have a second life. So once you start looking around, you start composting, and then I think maybe online I saw somebody using worms. I'm like, that's pretty interesting. So we bought some and we killed them, and then we bought some more and probably killed those too, and then eventually we got the hang of it. And then once you get a few epiphanies along the way where it's like you get a finished product. If anybody's ever seen worm castings, they kind of resemble coffee grinds. And if you see where it started and where it finished, you can't help but be a little bit in awe. It's like, okay, this is pretty amazing stuff. And then once you start doing it on scale, and I always joke, it's a little bit of a slippery slope when you get worms, because all of a sudden you're spending a lot of time and energy focused on them. It's like learning about them. Anybody who's done it, they get what I'm saying. And someone like me who by nature is curious, I need to know, I need to know. So I'll be spending hours and hours reading, and my wife jokes I got the largest worm library at my house anybody's ever seen. It's like, it's not, it's my claim to fame, I guess. But so you research, and so one thing led to another where, okay, you're starting to create product. And I think I was in about 2000, maybe 2013, we started them. Well, I wonder if there's something here. Is there a business model that we could do something with it? But it wasn't until about 2019, a friend of mine contacted me saying that he had a friend that was wondering how much I could make. And I was like, I don't know, how much does he need? He's like, well, he wanted 3,000 pounds. I'm like, that's a lot. So I said, okay, give me some time and I'll see what I could do. And we managed to get it made, and COVID hit. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do with 3,000 pounds of worm composting? So my wife suggested just put an ad out on Facebook, on Marketplace, or whatever. And it was like less than a week and it was gone. I'm like, okay, we got something, which is encouragement to kind of scale it up. So this is a photo of kind of one of, like, as we grew, we moved. So we started out in the basement in our garage like everybody else, and then we took over another garage, the whole garage, and then we moved it to our acreage. And as we went along, we just kept expanding and like running out of space. Because one thing with worms is you need square footage, because they're top feeders. They stay in the top 2-3 inches. So you need a space. As you can see, a lot of our bins are stacked. So if it's 1 square foot, you know, if we have 10 bins, all of a sudden on 1 square foot spot, we created 10 square feet. So you're working with the weather conditions. How can you maximize your space? How can you, and then you also have to keep in mind that you need air quality, you need, so everything's kind of got to match. So in 2020, we started running out of feed for our worms, and it's like we saw other people in other jurisdictions started doing organic waste collection. So we approached a bunch of people, and we got lots of no's, we got some yeses, but we did get a few people that got on board, and it was great for us because it gave us a chance to take that next step from backyard to kind of a small commercial vermicomposting site. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough that, okay, we got to figure out how to manage this. And at that point, because there's not a lot of people doing this, you kind of steal ideas from other industries. One is, okay, what are industries doing that got to feed large amounts of animals? So we went to the agricultural area, and they have all kinds of mixers where they're feeding hundreds of head of cattle or thousands of pigs, and they have equipment already that's made for creating large amounts of feed. So I said, okay, I think we could steal some of that. So that's kind of what we did, is we figured out ways to manage it. And it all has to be done indoors, because worms, for a good vermicomposting system to work, you need a lot of controls. Temperature being one of them, airflow, humidity, and so on. So it gave us time to figure that out. So along the way, here are some of the customers that we picked up. Like we do the Bloom Box, we'll do Chez Angela, Lions Manor. And I'd like to mention the first one was Smitty's on the Hill was the first one who signed up and said, yeah, okay, we'll give you guys a chance. We'll get it started. And theirs is interesting because they compost about 350 pounds a week. If you were to do the math, that would be the equivalent of driving 22,000 kilometers in your car. It just shows the impact of how much they, and then since then we've gone to the Shoppers Mall. Section 6 was our latest. We go out to CFB Shallow. We do pickups out there. There's a couple of cafeterias that compost. And they were quite happy because the guy organizing it said that they were the first military base in Canada to have a composting program. So they were pretty thrilled about that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's a good talking point. So with that being said, if anybody is interested in a commercial compost pickup, what we do is we basically will bring bins to your place, give a little training to your staff, and then every week we'll bring you back a nice clean bin that's been washed, and we'll process it. And people use it for their marketing. They use it for, it's kind of surprising because some of the places we went to, some of the staff weren't too on board with it. And then over time, they adjusted, and it's kind of like part of their systems. It's just like everything else, like taking out the trash, well, they take out the organic waste. And it works out quite well for them. Not only did we work on our systems, but we worked on ourselves a little bit. Last year, I took the Master Composting course for Canada. You basically attend seminars and write exams, and it qualifies you to run a commercial compost site. We traveled to the US a few times to different conferences for large-scale composters, and if I see a large composting facility on the map of where I'm going, I stop in. So like I say, we spend a lot of time trying to figure it out, trying to come up with a really great product. Actually, I'll just get you to. So our latest move is we're in the process of putting up a barn, if you will. Everybody joked it's like a hotel for the worms, but it is. I have to admit, the guy I found to put up, he just did a spectacular job. It's like, that was way better than I could have done, you know. But on a 40-acre parcel, and one of the things that we touched earlier on is that if castings have a limited shelf life, so what happens if we don't sell everything we produce? So on this particular patch of land that we bought, it's a 40-acre parcel. We planted over 6,000 trees and shrubs and fruit-bearing and nut-bearing and everything on there this summer. And then we have another 5,000 coming this summer, so eventually we'll fill it up. Even for experimentation, we can try our product on our own product, if you will, to see how it goes, you know. And then when people come and talk to us, like, okay, this is what I've done, and I can tell them, to the best of my knowledge, this is our experience with it. So it's a work in progress. You have to be comfortable with the idea that this is going to take 10, 15, 20 years before it finally all kind of plays out. But we got started anyway. Some of our customers, like Cody, use our product. We basically sell to some of the larger greenhouses in Manitoba. And lately, we're getting a lot of farmers coming in with the federal government trying to make changes on how they're applying inputs. There seems to be a whole new interest in, okay, what are our choices? And there's a lot of products that are becoming more popular because, and it's a combination of people realizing we have to change and the government forcing them to change, and it's like, okay, what we're doing is becoming more relevant. So, just a few of the things we do, like we don't make compost. It's just we don't have a compost site that's approved by the government. So what we do is we buy it from another producer, and they're good because they have professionals making it. They have a constant feedstock. They have lab people. We couldn't make it as good as they make it, so it just would make more sense to buy their product and resell it. We'll sell wood chips that we collect. We use it in our compost. We sell the worms online. We sell them locally. We make soil blends, which Cody uses in his greens, so if you're looking for starter mixes for your plants. And we also collect, like we had a few grow ops in some greenhouses that once they're done their growing cycle, they have no use for the plants. So we'll collect it from them and we process it and we amend it with compost, let it go through its curing process, and then we sell back to home gardeners for, if you have an upright bed, you can fill it up. If you just want to amend your garden, loosen it up, it's perfect for those kind of things. Would I start my plants in it? It's not consistent, so I would say no. But if you're looking for something where you're trying to add organic material to your garden, it's perfect. It's cost effective. And it's ended up being one of our biggest sellers. It's in the semi-loads every year that we go through this stuff. It's just, and we have an efficient delivery system where we can bring it to your house at, cost-wise, it's hard to beat. And our latest project we're working on is a cardboard paper-based soil blend. There's a company in the States called Pit Moss, where they basically take cardboard and paper, and it looks like peat moss when they're done. So it's like, we could do that. We have the equipment. So we tried it and we failed and we tried it and we failed. And eventually we got it to the point where it's working pretty good. And then we've sent stuff off to ACC to see if they could tell us how to amend it to make it work. And slowly we'll have something that is all a cardboard base that's a peat replacement. And I think we'll get it eventually. And then not only that, we do send stuff up to ACC where their students get to try it and they give us feedback on, what they found, what deficiencies, or which helps guide us to try to make a better product. So, and that kind of sums it up in a short bit. Is there any questions? Oh.
It's a really fun to see all these different aspects of composting and knowing that all of these things make such a difference in the CO2 that we're putting into the air, which is going to make a difference in our world, which Wow, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I'm really pleased that you all joined us. Are there, just make sure I'm not rushing here, any other questions? Wayne has a question. Comment.
I've been around the green team and whatnot for a long time around, and I didn't know all this stuff existed. So if I didn't know, I'm sure that most of Brandon doesn't know. I mean, this is just incredible story that we need to get out there, because we're diverting so much stuff. Like we're making such a huge difference that I mean, us as a green team, we need to do our job to make sure that this word gets out there.
This is a very hopeful story, and yes, yes, yes. Do you have a question or a comment? And they are. Let's give them. Yes, exactly. We need more hopeful stories, and so often we think this is too big, we can't do anything, but we can. And again, just like Kristen's slide said, you know, one thing done by millions of people makes a difference. And so our job then, all of us here, is to go out and tell people what's going on, what kind of things can be done, and help them, encourage them to do some of these same things that we're doing. Because we all want a better world, right? Thank you all very, very much. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come and listen to all of this and go home hopefully with hope in your heart. Thank you very much. And do remember, this is recorded so that you can access this. Just go to the Knox United Church Knox Connection website, and you can watch this again if you would like. Remember, keep March 5th available if you can, and meet us at the Riverbank Discovery Center for more ways that you can make a difference in this world. Thank you.